Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's program. I'm Em. I'm one of the librarians here at Rockland Public Library, and we are so thrilled to be hosting tonight's program. A couple things. First off, the next couple events at the library. Next Thursday on February 2nd, we're going to be hosting our last Camden Conference event of the year, of the season, before their the Camden Conference at the end of February. And that'll be with Sarah Curran, who's going to be talking about Maine's Climate Action Plan. And that'll be next Thursday at 6:30. And then the week after that, we're going to be hosting Greg Marley for a talk on beginner mushrooms, specifically on edible mushrooms that do not have toxic lookalikes. So it's a good entry to getting started in mushrooming. And that is going to be on February 9th at 6:00 p.m. In terms of questions, for those of us in the audience, this little handheld mic so that people on Zoom can hear your question as well. So just give me a little wave and I'll run that over to you during the question and answer period. And then people on Zoom, which I think is that camera, if you have questions, you're welcome to also use the little raise hand feature on Zoom, and I can invite you to unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can always just type them into the chat and I'll read them aloud for you. And I think that's all that business. So I will introduce tonight's speaker. Author of Adrift, Liner Notes, and Salty Liquor, Gary Rainford lives on Swans Island year-round. Gary is an award-winning poet published in a wide range of literary magazines, university journals, and newspapers. Adrift tells the story of his mother's dementia and Alzheimer's disease, and I'll turn it right over to Gary. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out. I really expected to be presenting this to Em by myself. I think it's pretty fair to say that we all accept a certain amount of uncertainty every day. I know, living on Swans Island, I certainly do. In fact, this morning, I get a text from my wife who's on Swans Island and says, "Did you get the text from the high school? Our daughter, who's 15, goes to MDI, has a 2-hour delay." I said, "No, I didn't get the text." So that wasn't too difficult to organize. And then the wind just gets worse and worse. And I was planning on heading out from MDI around 2:30, 3 o'clock, grab some food, and I get a text from my wife again. Ferry's not running. Rest of the runs are canceled for the rest of the day. So she can't come off island to take Miri to diving lessons, not diving lessons, diving practice. Thank you. So more uncertainty. Of course, we make it work because that's what you do when you live on an island. Things just work out. It's just how it is. But it got me truly thinking about tonight, because uncertainty was raised to an unbelievable level when I started caring for my mom with Alzheimer's disease. In 2017, I became her legal guardian, and that was early in the fall. Then that December, and I knew that there was some decline, but she lived down in Florida. We had more of a telephone relationship. And so she was able to not necessarily disguise it, but I just, without getting those physical cues, seeing her face, I didn't see what my stepfather was sort of alluding to. And then my stepfather suddenly dies in December, and I have a crisis on my hand, and I have to rush down and take care of my mom. And I become her principal caretaker, bring her back up to Maine. There's no way I discover in those few months that living on Swans Island, I would be able to provide the services that my mom deserved, that she required. And I found a place in Bangor that worked out for us. But I think one of the lessons that and I think think if I were a continent and I had tectonic plates inside me, the moment I became my mother's guardian and caretaker, those plates just started shifting around, and they shifted for years. And then she died in 2020, and they still shifted. And although they're starting to settle, I can honestly and say with complete uncertainty that I'm not quite sure where I'm headed as a result of that experience. It was one of those experiences that changed everything. Bob Dylan cover. Resident assistant Jean wheelchairs an old woman into the common area where it's standing room only for Drake, the one and sings once a month, making rounds at all the assisted living facilities in northern Maine. When Jean sets the wheelchair, breaks, and kisses the old woman's cheek, as kissing her own daughter's, tears fill my eyes. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Yes, yes, it is, says Bobby, my mother, and with her fingers. I think about that often because it makes me think back to when I was 17. I had left, my mom gave me a fantastic gift. I graduated high school early. What did I want as my high school graduation gift? I wanted a one-way ticket to LA. And reluctantly, my mother did that. And that was a life-changing moment in my life. And I've had a few since then, and now I'm another. And what's going through my head is, holding on to things that just shouldn't be held on to as tightly, because there's no certainty that it's going to continue to stay there. This was my first experience with hospice during this time, and I was given a little pamphlet, and I started thinking about this again recently, that some of you might have gone from my site, The Dying Experience. I understand it's a pretty common presentation that people get when hospice enters their lives, and it's for the patient and the family, and it sort of gives you some insight into the dying process. And I got a really cool telephone call about a month ago, maybe it's 2 months now, from a guy down in New Hampshire who read my book, and we just started chatting. And he thought that Adrift could be a companion piece for hospice. And I was really grateful that he felt this way, because although Adrift, my book, there are a lot of painful poems about my mother's dementia and her decline, and my response and how I tried my best to care for her. And there are poems about her dying, but it's truly a book about living. And one of the reasons why I drive through the rain and the snow to talk about Adrift in the winter of Maine is because I think it's really important to talk about the living part of what we're all going to experience. We're all just, we're temporary. It's going to happen. I'm driving north. I don't recall at all where I was coming home from, but my mother was at a point in her decline where she didn't know I was her son anymore. And she wasn't quite sure. I wasn't quite certain that she thought that I was family anymore. We kind of had that. There was some of that experience, but she clearly thought me as someone being familiar. And I'm driving, and I'm waiting to get to the exit 182 on the 95, because that's the exit I hit to head down to Ellsworth and get the ferry at Bass Harbor. But what's going through my head is, I really should go see mom. What's stopping me from going to see mom? Well, I'm gonna miss the ferry if I don't hit the 182. And so all this pressure I'm creating for myself in my head. And about a mile or so before the 182, just these lines fall into my lap. And it was clear what decision I needed to make. Karma. I stopped at Bobby's to give her a kiss, because in each of us is all of us. And I truly believe that. You know, I went to see my mom, give her a kiss on her head. I did it as much for her as I did for myself, as I did for my daughter, who if she's faced with my having a similar decline, you know, that she sees what the right move is in this particular circumstance. You just do things for other people because it's at the end of the day, it's all we have are each other. I left Florida with my mother, packed up her RAV4. Actually, it's in the parking lot, and packed her in the back seat, put a pillow on her lap, put Maxie, her toy poodle, right on her lap, and we drove north. And I locked up her condo, and in my head, I said, okay, I can come back during spring break. I have the week off. I can settle things at that time. So 3 months later, I go back and go through everything in my mom's place. And I come across, I think about this item most when I reflect on her condo, is her yearbook from high school. And I threw away so much stuff that I just thought she didn't need it anymore. I didn't need it. It just wasn't doing anybody any good. And then here's this yearbook, and I couldn't throw it away. And I start flipping through it, and I'm reading, and I'm thinking, who's Bobby? Or writing, dear Bobby, dear Bobby, dear Bobby, have a good life. You're going to do so well. And I was struck. I never knew my mother as Bobby. Her name is Barbara. So I see the connection. And when I get back to Bangor, my mother, unfortunately, although at this point she's sort of 50-50, 50% clear, 50%, 100% in denial, but could not give me any clarity into Bobby. In fact, she was rather upset. There was no Bobby. I'll read this first and then I'll fill in the gaps. All we want is love. You bring me light, says Bobby, as I guide a forkful of shredded egg sandwich to her lips. There's a familiar focus in her eyes and a clarity to her words, but neither lasts more than a wink. I do not want to watch my mother dying today, but we do not get to cherry pick when life needs or does not need us most. And I think that realization early on, my life plan did not include taking care of my mom like this. In 2017, she was in complete denial, and so was her husband. I think they were a bit embarrassed, and then that embarrassment turned into just fear. Sick, my mom was sick. Together, they were able to muddle through the day as sort of one entity almost. Is kind of how I see it in my head. They were one strong person. His brain, his body was shot, And my mom's body, her body was strong. I mean, she was just an ox. And and she about it. She would never allow me to even bring it up into conversation. It was just a dead topic. It was avoid it or have conflict. And there was no sense having conflict with my mom at this point because there was the conflict was not going to make the situation better. I recently had a friend, just last week, a friend died. And you know, everybody in here perhaps has this type of person or has had this type of person. You know, it's a friend, but it's either Uncle Jim or Aunt Sue or Grandpa, but it's not biological. And so I moved to Swans Island in 2001. And when we decided that it was a place where we wanted to land for good, we couldn't afford a house. And there are houses for sale on the shore, but those properties were just out of reach for our teacher. We moved off, and we weren't off 3 or 4 days, and Jimmy Wheaton stops my wife at the ferry because she teaches on the island and says, Mama is ready to talk now about selling that house. And so we end up buying this property. It was the Staples. It had been in the Staples family from the first settlers on Swans Island. And the deed had never been out of the family until they sold it to us. And so it was really special for that transaction that turned into a relationship to happen. And Jimmy and Sue ultimately become Grandpa Jimmy and Grandma Sue when we have our daughter. And Jimmy got sick back in April and more or less has been in the hospital back and forth since then. And he died last week. And I was struck by I don't know exactly what it is. They didn't have this class in college. They didn't have pre-med for poets at the time. So I just don't know enough about the body. But the body just doesn't seem to want to give up living. And I noticed that with my mother, and I was struck by that. There were so many times, particularly when she transitioned from assisted living to memory care. There were so many times, so many situations, so many accidents where I just thought, my mom, she must be done living at this point. She can't possibly, I know she doesn't want to live like this, but why is her body continuing to thrive? And I saw that in Jimmy. He went to the hospital in Bar Harbor. They shot him up to Bangor for a big, huge surgery. And I thought, well, that's it. He's not going to live through the surgery, but he lives through the surgery. And then he's on all this life support and in an induced coma while he heals. And then it's clear that they need to remove life support. But he still lives for several days. And I'm just struck by how strong the body is. And my mom did something that Jimmy's experience makes me reflect back on. It's called Life Alert. Balancing a tray of coffee, hot chocolate munchkins, and my laptop, I thumb the 4-digit code into the keypad that unlocks memory care. The door clicks, a light turns green, and Bobby is sleeping, standing up in the common area. Other women at various stages of dementia and sickness sitting there too. Carol, picking at scrambled eggs and honeydew melon. Diane, trying not to be seen, covers her face with a napkin. Frances, cradling a naked baby doll. The medtech Denise, who's Army son recently graduated from boot camp smiles, says hello, cheery, as a bowl of candy red apples, and tells me how my mother dressed herself this morning. Like she's learning instead of dying. Mom, I kiss her head and I whisper, are you done with this life yet? Bobby's eyes open slowly. She spots the box of munchkins and she replies, no, no, I'm trying to keep it. I don't go into this as much in this discussion, or at all actually, but humor really was the glue that sustained me and sustained my mother and I. I would go up 2 times a week from Swans Island and spend the day with her. And as long as she and I were laughing, I could endure it. I had to endure it regardless, but I could endure it with a sense of peace, perhaps. Once the laughter ended, the experience shifted. But the people at Winterberry Heights, much as the humor, I was shocked back in, I think it was October, may have been September, and I'm doing a reading down in Pittsfield. And I see these 2 women who I haven't seen. My mom died in 2020, and I hadn't seen them since then. Looking, and it who were Winterberry Heights. They heard I was doing a reading, and and I just thought, and I thought this when my mom was at Winterberry Heights, that there's this, but I learned that there are people who love at several notches higher than what's just like seems natural to me. And I'm struck by that they were able to not only love it, that they still were able to go home to their own families, something to share. Because I would get home and I was spent, I was exhausted, I was in pain. I know at the facility 10-hour shifts, and they seem to be able to go home with smiles on their faces somehow and still come back with love in their hearts. So I've got some poems for those people. And I was shocked to see Candace and Heather. I don't think I would have done that 2 years later for somebody that I was helping. But they did. And that just kind of shows me the level of love that my mom experienced there, and me too. So while my mother was, and this is kind of a cute term, her brain doctor in Florida, when we went, referred to my mom as pleasantly demented. And she was pleasant, she was cute. She was like I said, 50-50. And the 50% when she wasn't clear, she was still really pleasant, nice to be around. And my mother and I, we would take trips, mostly to Hannaford to get some supplies. At the time, she had a full apartment at Winterberry. The kitchen wasn't complete, but it was microwave, little burner stove, refrigerator. And we'd also go to Dunkin' Donuts. And Loretta, who was just Loretta, just someone who works at Dunkin' Donuts, who's probably in her early 70s. And she just liked us, liked my mother. Senior citizen discount. Where's Mama? Loretta brightens when it's my turn at the register. She can't travel like she used to. I reply, pinching a few bills out of my wallet. I haven't seen you guys in a while and was wondering. Hospice checks in now practically daily. Loretta's eyes shift at the mention of hospice. Her husband died recently. I'm sorry, she says. I really, really enjoyed talking with Mama. I'm going to miss her. Then she hands me a bag of our donuts and fits 2 coffees steaming into a coffee tray. I sure hope you didn't mind me calling her Mama. It's sweet, Loretta. Bobby loved talking to you too. I nod, waiting for a final tally. Well, okay then, you take care, Loretta says, avoiding my eyes because she knows I expect her to tell me how much. But the tears she's holding me back, the tears she's holding back say something else. Pointing, Loretta signals at the person in line behind me and asks, "What'll it be, hon?" So just that little act of, she couldn't take money from me. And something so small really is just huge, just absolutely huge. I mean, she probably could have gotten in a lot of trouble with Dunkin' Donuts. Not by me if I was her manager, but I don't know what the protocol is there. There are a lot of patterns. There are a lot of routines I discovered. At Winterberry Heights, not just the workers, but the people who live there. And they were just amazing people most of the time. And all of a sudden, my mom had trouble in her apartment. We had to downsize to a different apartment on the other side of Winterberry Heights. It was a very confusing experience for my mother. It was as though we had just moved there again. There's no connective tissue between one moment and the next. And in the hallway is a bench, and Teresa is always there, just sitting there. Teresa lives down the hall. Sisterhood of the Caring. I'm Teresa Goodrich, she says, relaxing on a bench in the corridor, sipping apple juice. Teresa is Bobby's age, but there's a jewel in her eyes that Bobby doesn't have anymore. Look at you all spiffy today. She lifts a red Solo cup at Bobby, who replies with zigzags of disordered syllables. Your mother was naked, except for her smile when she came out yesterday for breakfast, says Teresa. But I got her situated. Isn't that right, Bobs? Teresa makes another toast. Thank you. A reply, a ping of sadness rippling through me. I want to comment about the fellowship here. Old ladies helping old ladies. But like Bobby, I can't find the right words. Or maybe words don't matter as much as helping each other. Some workers who stick out. I think we had a not we say it like I fell down the stairs, but my mother had several terrible accidents. And there was one, I got a telephone call from St. Joe's, and they said, can you get out here, because we don't know if your mother's going to make it. Well, I'm on Swans Island, and you don't just get anywhere without, the ferry, planning a little bit. Then it's an hour and 20 minutes, without traffic, without rain, without snow. And I get up there in the morning, and in the meantime, I've connected and reached out to hospice, because I thought she was going to die, and I didn't know what else to do, and I needed some direction. And so I set up a meeting, and we're going to meet at Winterberry Heights, But I called the hospital first and they said, you can come pick up your mother. We can, come on, what are you talking about? So my mother and I have a meeting with hospice, and it's almost 2 years before my mom dies, but hospice enters our life at that point because they realize that my mother is really, really dependent and fragile. Well, fragile insofar as she's tripping and falling, but strong enough to, bounce back out of the emergency room. And so Debbie and Sheila are workers from hospice, and hospice was just amazing, those people. Wonder Woman. Sheila from Beacon Hospice sticks her head around the corner. Come in. Bobby's voice is small. I'm still here. You're an amazing woman. Sheila squeezes Bobby's feet over the covers, then both legs, then a twig of his shoulder poking out from under the blanket. And Bobby's forehead. If I cracked my head like you, honey, Sheila pulls a blouse off a hanger from the closet now. I'd be in traction. Sheila glances at Debbie, Bobby's caseworker, and raises an eyebrow at the miracle of walking away from St. Joe's emergency room after falling down a flight of stairs. How do you feel? Not all that amazing. Bobby turns, looks at me reclined in the motorized lift chair by the bed. Maybe that's the key to life, not knowing how amazing we are. I joke, but I am dead serious. Elaine was an interesting character only because, not only, one of the reasons that stuck out for me at least. She would trot around with her cane, and she's probably in her 80s, but she was really clear, but she made it clear to me that she had dementia, that she was declining, and she had a career taking care of people in assisted living facilities. And she just had this fantastic attitude. And she was sort of like the antithesis, the complete opposite of my mother, where my mom was in complete denial. Elaine was just, I wouldn't say she was celebrating or embracing it, but she knew there was nothing she could do to keep it away. And so she was just living her days, knowing that, she's going to continue to decline. It's called Ken Kesey. How's your mother? Elaine shuffles over. I'm signing the visitor's log at the reception desk. You are Bobby's son, right? Yes, I reply. I'm the youngest. I watched her slipping right out of the arms of two aides like a trust fall. I glance at the open staircase, over 10 steps to the first landing. 45-degree slope. Bobby must have bounced twice before striking her head and calculating. I'm so glad she's all right, Elaine sighs. This is some one flew over the cuckoo's nest place. 1 minute you're glad, then you're mad, and then you're glad again, like you have no votes. I guess we're all walking in circles. Elaine seizes her quad cane, pats my hand, and shuffles off to Zumba. I don't think I would have made it through the days that I was there, or the days that I wasn't there, if it weren't for the people that just filled my life with their love and their experiences, and just I don't think I'm a negative person, but on Swan's Island, I'm a very solitary person. And so I'm not around people all that much. And so this really pulled me out of my, not comfort zone. I grew up in New York. I know how to be around lots of people. but it just perhaps reset something that I had perhaps misplaced years ago after living on Swans Island for 20 years. Just how important my neighbors are, and strangers in the store. You folks, it's important. I want to read some poems that are just really, there were moments where it's actually kind of fun. Fun's not the right word. I'm a creative person, so I'm never bored. I'm always writing. I'm never at a loss for just sit. I could sit right here in the dark. And you could come back tomorrow, and I'd be fine. And my mom's decline was such that I could say anything to her, and so I played with her. We went on journeys, we went on little expeditions in our head, and I anything that popped into my head, I just throw it out. There was no reason not to have a little fun play like that. And so there's some poems where it's just me being myself because I could be. Golden age of whatever's left. On the flat screen TV in the sitting room, Dinah Shore sings, crying on the inside. Then Paul Anka, Teen Idols, The Ed Sullivan Show. Then song clips of Patti Page and K-Star flash, black and white. And I asked Bobby, was that your music growing up? No. She snaps, shoulders swinging, dirty socks tapping. Where am I exactly? She leans close to my face. Heaven, I take her hand and we mash potato to Frankie Lane, then the McGuire sisters. Where's the baby? There's the baby. A stripped down, lonesome version on the radio with Johnny Cash plucking a guitar. He growls, I keep my eyes wide open all the time. And then Dimpy tells anybody who will listen she has to go to the toilet. So I point out the bathroom again. Rose fills a glass of cranberry juice with leftover Brussels sprouts from lunch that looks like testicles floating in a laboratory beaker. Denise, passing by, taps my arm, sits across the room and spoons crushed pills mixed with grape jelly into Cora's mouth. She winces as if tasting a wedge of lemon for the first time. Bobby, my mother, is looking down now, hands resting on the table. Animals, silly animals, upended, spilling its binding, loose pages, dog-eared. It's as though Bobby is pondering, trying at once to conjure the past, predict the future, and escape the dreariest moments of her present confusion. She looks at me, a time-lapse video, 80 years compressed into seconds. Gary? She says, jolts of lightning in her voice, head jerking up, surprise and relief in her brown, starless eyes, startled that I'm still sitting right beside her, sipping coffee. Peekaboo, Mom. I joke for my benefit, then plant a kiss on her head. I guess I read this only because of the, Ukraine being in the news for a year, and my mom was half Ukrainian and half Italian, and she grew up speaking Yiddish with her grandmother and her great grandmother. And I, of course, don't speak Yiddish, but I would speak with my mom in my Yiddish. Compassionate, caring. Let's speak Ukrainian, I suggest, while sitting on Bobby's bed, holding her fragile hand, blue and yellow veins like Google Maps. One foot in this world, the other in a new city, another life. When she was a girl, Bobby spoke Ukrainian with her mother, a private language of melody and connection. Blah, 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 blah. I sing song in my best Slavic accent, how I've always spoken my mother's mother tongue. So she laughs like an explosion of paper confetti. But then she's unconscious again. Hospice says Bobby's organs are shutting down. Came across, so I do some work, my company does some work for the Maine Seacoast Mission, and we produce an anthology, an annual anthology called The Island Reader, and I've been working on it for 17 years, 16 years. We're on volume 17, and I was going through submissions just a week or so ago, and one of the artists, his attachments weren't working. They weren't really attachments. He had pasted material in the body of the email and just wasn't working out. So normally I have a canned email response for those types of situations, and put it back in the lap of the other artists. But Luther left his telephone number, and I thought, okay, let me call him. Why not? It's better than texting. I mean, than emailing, or not better, but I don't get to talk with enough people during the course of the day. So I call him, and it was one of those situations where he doesn't know who I am. He's reluctant to talk to me, and he says something that kind of puts me off. He says, "Can you call me back in 15 minutes? I'm driving in my Mercedes." And I think, oh, okay, just the Mercedes. I'm probably not going to call you back. And then I was mad at myself for feeling that way. And I put it off, and he emails back the Island Reader, and I happen to be the administrator, so he doesn't know it's me reading the emails. And he goes on to say there was some sort of miscommunication, and would like some direction, and I thought, okay, like, let me redeem myself. I'm gonna call him. Now he's in his rolls. No joke. I think, all right, but now he expects the telephone. Well, he doesn't expect the phone call, but he knows who I am, and he turns out to be a lovely person. And in the last correspondence, because he wants me to understand why he has a Mercedes, why he has a Rolls, this Beals Island boy, born and raised, and he knows that the gears are going in my head, and they were. And I tried, not in so many ways, to ask without asking, because I just didn't know if, why do you have a Rolls Royce? He told me he's a teacher. I'm thinking, I'm a teacher. Let's see my mom's car I'm driving. But his last line in his last email connects with me. And I'm going to share it with you. It says, "I believe we cannot see or touch the most beautiful and precious things in the world. They must be felt within us." And I have this conflict of, I've had it all my life. I know this. I've heard this. I've heard this 700 different ways, said 700 different ways. It's not new information. but there's this conflict I have with intellect and emotion. It's almost as though my emotional response has to catch up with my intellectual response, because I know this intellectually, and that was how my experience with my mom was. I knew lots of things. I knew she was going to decline. I knew that I was not going to be her son anymore. I wasn't going to be family anymore. But it wasn't until I had those emotional experiences validate that intellectual knowledge before it really impacted me in a way that made me think about it differently, think about my life differently, think about who I am as a father, as a husband, where I want to go tomorrow. I think, well, my mom started showing signs of dementia in her early 70s. And I think, wow, it's possible I only have 20 years left. I forget stuff all the time now. Been doing that for 40 years. So, it's uncertain. There's a, and I'm gonna end with this last poem. There's a concept called law of conservation that I discovered. I didn't know about it until I started thinking about my mom. I grew up, I don't want to say I was forced to go to Catholic, what are they called? On Saturday, I had to go to, no, but that's essentially what it was. Catechism. I think I stopped going to church after I made confirmation. And I got sent to church, but my mother and father, they were divorced, but they never went to church. So that always seemed a little disjointed. And I don't truly have, as an adult, I haven't been a religious person, but I think about religious concepts or mystical concepts, or where we go after this life concepts, and experiencing my mom's decline and sitting with her in her last 2 weeks of living really made me reflect on who I am and where I'm going, where my mom's going. And I always felt really comfortable in graduate school in the early 90s with, I did work with the, not with, but on the body of work of Robinson Jeffers. He's considered the poet of California. And he has this concept of inhumanism. And more or less, we are infinitesimal parts to a greater whole. And I kind of liked that, we're all sort of in this together one way or another. And it didn't get religious for me, yet it felt like there was a philosophy, something that I could dig into. And I've always thought about that, but not enough for it to impact the decisions of my life. But then I came across this idea of law of conservation. And in a nutshell, this law is just, nothing is either created or destroyed. Nothing's created. Energy is not created or destroyed. Energy is just here, but it's transferred. And I was looking for a visual on that, and the one that sort of made most sense was a battery. So you have you have a battery. You fill that battery up with a battery charger, and then you take that battery and you put it into your cell phone, and then you transfer that energy into the cell phone. And so that energy is constantly sort of moving. And I really liked that possibility for my mom. She would never talk about, because she was in denial, she would never talk about what she wanted with her body when she was dead. Her husband, when I buried him, his kids made it clear that he wanted her to be with him, but they didn't get along for like 40 years. She had been trying to divorce, and I'm thinking, I don't know if that's a good idea. It's not going to affect her life anymore, but I didn't like knowing that I was sending my mom off to, more of what she was trying to get away from. So I thought, nah, no. Needless to say, mom's still in my office, but I liked that transference of energy that mom's just transferred. The, the there's it was springtime and Adrift had just come out, and I sit at my office that overlooks my a field, and it's gorgeous, and there's a crabapple tree, and I see this robin, I'm not sorry, a cardinal shoot from over into the tree, and it was just beautiful because it's red. Last winter wasn't tough, but it was still winter, and it was just lovely to see this hopeful sign of spring to come, and I didn't think much of it. Then she comes back. I don't know if it's the same cardinal, but a week or two later, and I got thinking that triggered a memory of my house growing up. I grew up on Long Island, town next to Levittown. Many of you might have heard of Levittown, those planned communities post World War II. And so postage stamp lot, very tiny houses. And behind, you open up the back door, which was really the front door. And my mom had this wall. You know this wall. There's spoons, little spoons from where she traveled over the years. And there's little embroidered things that she's got, and sayings up on the wall. My stepfather was a recovering alcoholic, so there's the Serenity Prayer, and I remembered that there was this embroidery of a cardinal. And I was like, oh, okay. And so now this cardinal is linked back to my mom and my memories, and maybe a week or so later, my daughter needs to go off island, and so we do this ferry shuffle with vehicles. You could either buy a reservation ticket, which is $10 or $15 or $20 more than the regular ticket, just to get a commitment to go off. Excuse me. Or you can pull up in the back line 3 days before and just keep moving it up over the course of the next few days, and then guarantee that you'll get off. And that's generally what we do unless there's an emergency. So needless to say, my daughter and I are driving back home, driving down Atlantic Road. It's the last stretch before my place. And all of a sudden, and if my daughter wasn't with me, I would have thought I was crazy. This red cardinal comes shooting across our path. And Mary was like, oh, that's beautiful. And I just thought, wow, that's I don't believe that my mom is a cardinal by any stretch of my imagination, or that she was reincarnated. Maybe she was, but it's fun to think about. It's a lovely possibility. She could have said it. In fact, that's sort of what I of course I have to go dig for some research, and what is the cardinal? Is there symbolism around this? And some cultures believe that it's a message from the other side, that they're okay. And there's some others, but I thought, oh, that's nice. I like that. Law of conservation of Bobby. Denise, a med tech, who will quit next Wednesday because memory care is a revolving door of turnovers and hardships, plunges a dose of liquid Ativan into Bobby's mouth. Lips shaking, hands shaking, shoulders shaking, as if gale force winds rush alongside the rushing blood in her veins. 41 knots of flesh, bones, and primal confusion in her brown, twitchy eyes. Do you have pain? I put my hand over Bobby's thin, arthritic hand. I want out, she mutters. And I imagine her diaphanous soul separating from her decrepit material form, rising to the fluorescent lights and sailing across the common room, through the walls, into the trees where it continues to rise and expand, wispy, fragmented energy transferring into the warm, yellow March sun patrolling over the frozen Penobscot River and back. Thank you very much for coming out.
You touched on the denial and avoiding conflict, and I'm just curious the nuts and bolts of how you got the RAV4 away from your mom. I'm sure she was at some point not allowed to drive anymore.
Yeah, that's a long story, but I could condense it. So just before my stepfather dies, my mom's license had been had expired, and my stepfather just didn't, go through the motions of getting that license reinstated. But my mother, all of a sudden, around this time, decides she's getting a car and she's driving. Father was the kind of guy that could not say no to my mother, never said no to her. She was boss, she really was. And I called the police down in Newport Richey and said, hey, my mother is picking up a car and she doesn't even know who she is. And my stepfather is going to permit this. And they said, there's nothing we can do. So we more or less just skirted around her not driving. There was always, it was very easy to deflect my mother. You can always put an excuse or a reason in front of her. So for instance, I got her to stop using the stove just by taking the knobs. She couldn't figure it out. And she couldn't figure it out. She stopped asking, she stopped showing interest in wanting to use it. So, and that's pretty much how I approached things that her denial of the driving. Early on, I needed to know what was going on with my mom and Alzheimer's particularly. And I discovered that these amyloid plaques, and I'm a teacher, so I want to teach. If you forget something, I want to push you towards the right words or the right information. But these plaques are eating away my mom's brain. She's not learning anymore. She's no faculty or ability to learn. So as a result, I thought, well, okay, learning's out the door. I don't want to have, I had conflict with my mother all my life. I don't want to continue having it here. And so I just always took the path of least resistance. So she wants to go somewhere. She wants to go home, always calling me to go home. And so we went home. Home was wherever I took her. Didn't matter. Dunkin' Donuts, we're going home, Mom. We're in Hannaford's. Yeah, we're home. So it was just a matter of me not being upset, accepting that my job was to make her time with me as positive as possible. It just didn't matter. And so, I had to take myself out. I had to take Gary, her son, Gary, the adult, out of that relationship. I had to shift it. I'm Gary, the person who's here because my mother has nobody else, and I can do it. And so I used everything that I could think of to just put a smile on her face when she was suffering.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let me see if we have anything on Zoom.
Zoom question.
Anyone on Zoom are welcome to type something into the chat or raise your hand and we can unmute yourself there. Or anyone in person.
Hi. I have this book that my father had Alzheimer's. He passed away a week ago. And this book I've been reading, I did the same thing as you're talking about, doing the research. And this is the best one I've found yet. And it talks about the amyloid plaques, but it talks about the amyloid plaques as a natural thing that the body does
Mhm.
to protect itself,
Yeah.
and that there can be many reasons that Alzheimer's is caused. Anything from deficiencies, hormone deficiencies or vitamin deficiencies to insulin resistance, which is, I think, what my father had. And it talks about this, and it talks about sugar being one of the worst things you can do for yourself, and that Alzheimer's is called the type 3 diabetes at this point. So just wanted to mention
Yeah.
it if anybody wanted to take a
Yeah,
look.
there was a
Um,
interesting, so for many years, most of the research was funneled towards this amyloid plaque theory, they call it, or hypothesis. And it and as a result, it kept a lot of monies going elsewhere for other possible to consider other possibilities about where Alzheimer's is coming from. And so it's an interesting time now, because I think maybe we'll, between the two, we'll now that, not the two, but now that it's opened up a little bit and funding is going elsewhere, I just came across something. They're saying that just minor activity, just walking regularly, I don't explain it very well, but I guess it turns out our organs produce chemicals in a way that they thought only our brains produced. And so it's not just our brains sending chemical information to our body. It's our pancreas, and it's our livers also creating this information that's shooting to the rest of our body and telling us stuff. And so they're saying that just a little bit of walking, they believe, is not going to cure Alzheimer's or dementia, but it's going to keep it away a little bit longer. So who knows? Yeah, I'm hoping that in 20 years, they'll
Well,
have
I've
some.
heard that they're also, the reason that they haven't had that much research, because they've been looking for one drug that
Mhm.
cured it.
Right.
And it's actually maybe turning out to be your diet and your
Yeah.
exercise and some other
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And that's not going to make money for the
Right.
pharma.
I
pharmacy
talk about
people.
I talk about that drug in my introduction, and it turns out that drug is killing people too. So it's tough. There's a lot of unknowns. That book looks really old. When was it
Well,
published?
that's actually my second copy because I gave one away already, but I
Okay.
just keep buying them online at secondhand stores and passing
'Cause
them out.
I couldn't find that one book that provided all the information for me, and that's how I sort of felt like, these poems that I had written, that I wrote, or that's what I was looking for. That was the information I needed. Dr. Singer in Bangor became my mom's brain doctor, and he was great because he didn't hold anything back. She may have been pleasantly demented on this day, but he painted the picture of the worst case scenario so that I was prepared. And that information, those details, really, that's what I was really, truly looking for. I didn't want the worst case scenario. We got the worst case scenario because she stopped eating, stopped drinking, and her very robust and strong body needed to die. It took over 2 weeks for her body to finally just shut down and be done suffering. Thanks again. Appreciate it.